Well, that game was pretty much mostly boring. I would say outside of the most memeable, I think, moment of the entire season in the NFL was when Younghoe Koo just I mean, you just need to go watch it. The Giants kicker, Younghoe Koo, absolutely. I don't know how you come back from what he did because it was so embarrassing. And he's got to get cut by the Giants for sure. And I don't know how he rebounds in his career because that was bad. I'll let you go watch that. But outside of tonight, there was definitely a lot of good stuff for fantasy football this week. And obviously, I always come on here to get transparent after the Monday night game about what I got right and what I got wrong in the previous week of fantasy football. And there's always plenty of both. And I don't feel like I can go on with it until I get this out of the way because I think transparency should be important to everybody. It's definitely become a thing on my channel, and I haven't seen it with anybody else. So I'm always going to have it this way because I view it to be extremely valuable for everyone moving forward. So just make sure to go down there, drop a like on the video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support. Now, I want to start out with this. I think that viewing someone like a running back that is a perceived handcuff it's kind of like investing, right? Like you kind of invest in something, but you're like, it's not really it's not hitting my bank account. I can't see it. Where's it going? It's not benefiting me right now. So people oftentimes, I think, get really just kind of bored with investing. And I think the same thing about backup running backs. They're only viewed as handcuffs who have only have the value whenever their quarterback goes down. And I think it's just kind of a backwards way of thinking a little bit, but I can understand it, right? I can definitely understand the prospect of not wanting to have a backup running back on your team if that's all the value that they provide. So I get it. Now, on the other hand of that, I would say this. When you have a running back that is, yes, technically a handcuff for now, but has potential to become the running back one on their team, I don't think that it is just to be viewed as a handcuff situation. And so Kyle Monangai of the Chicago Bears, right? He is only viewed as, in a lot of cases for a lot of people, a backup running back, right? And I kept telling people over the weeks, this is a guy that is not just a backup. Like, he is going to absolutely be very important for someone's team in the near future. Like, I can definitely see him really taking control of this backfield at some point. So I said to people, do not drop him. Like, he is a guy that you do not want to drop at this point in the fantasy season. And people just, again, were very, negative with him, and I just kept seeing his roster percentage go down, and I had to include him on today's waiver wire article on fsroundup.com. But Kyle Monangai has been very important to this team for a while, and this past week he goes off for a massive game. So when I watch it, I'm not surprised by it whatsoever because I fully expected the backfield to continue to be split and for him to continue to get consistent involvement, and because the Bears are a run-first team, they want to utilize that. So I just kind of view it as one of those scenarios where when it comes to backup running backs, I get it. Like, it's kind of, again, like investing. You want, like, if you have investments, maybe you can't see them and they're not liquid in your bank account and you can't utilize that money, but at the same time, you could still utilize that money in other ways to continue to grow your investment. Kyle Monangai was just more than investment, though. And it wasn't to be viewed as just a plain investment that couldn't go in your lineup. Like, he can go in your lineup any given week, honestly. He's in flexible territory, and people just need to kind of recognize that at this point. Here's something I got really wrong, and I don't feel like I can start this out any other way when it comes to stuff I got wrong last week, because it wasn't just last week. This has been building for many, many weeks. And I think that it's just kind of a natural thing in life. It's like, if you've got this thing that has been so for sure and so good for your life, over a significant period of time, whether it's years, whether it's months for you, like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I do believe that in a lot of respects. However, there is times where you have to accept when something isn't working, and you have to try to pivot off of that. Because Lamar Jackson, for many, many weeks, it has not been working for fantasy football. And I even acknowledged this. I said, the guys, if you watch him play, he clearly is not healthy. Like, he is not a guy who looks completely healthy to me. And I don't think that if you've watched Lamar, he'd be healthy to you if you've seen him over the years. So people just kept asking me over the last several weeks, do I bench Lamar for Matt Stafford? Do I bench him for Jacoby Brissett? And I kept telling people, man, I'm not going to bench him because I drafted this guy to be a game changer, and I think it's still coming. And when it came to this week, it was kind of I don't know the right word, but it was the tipping point, I would say, as far as Lamar Jackson, because everything lined up perfectly for him. This was a guy that was playing the Cincinnati Bengals defense, who had been atrocious this year, the entire year. So I was like, heading into the week, I said to people who asked me about Lamar, I'm going to play him one more time. However, if he busts again, and it's against the Cincinnati Bengals defense, he's not coming back from this. There is no way that Lamar Jackson, I can continue to defend him and continue to say that he's a high-end quarterback play. And he was a bummer yet again. Now, I will say there was one play that did get called back to Zay Flowers. Should have been a 40-yard touchdown off a bogus offensive penalty, offensive pass interference. But that wouldn't have made much of a difference. Like, it would have helped. But at the same time, it still would have been a bad play. And so, Lamar Jackson, to me, the hardest part about this one is knowing that a lot of people's fantasy seasons got ruined by this, because I mean, this is do or die time. Like, if you're already not, if you were 9-3 heading into the week, like that's not a big deal to have Lamar do what he just did. But if you were 6-6 heading into the week and you lost because Lamar Jackson couldn't get another 5 points, that's what really bums me out, is knowing that there was people that played Lamar Jackson because of my discussions before the game, and knowing what he did on Thanksgiving night on a national stage against one of the worst defenses in the entire league was a real pain point for me. So that's really what gets to me the most, is just kind of knowing that one should have worked. But the bottom line is, it's been a thing for a long time now, which is that you can't ignore when a player is not 100%. And Lamar, I would say, is probably playing closer to 70% than 90%. And so when you factor that in, it's like this guy, if you force him to play within the pocket, he's not as electric in fantasy just because of numbers. I mean, if he gets 200 yards through the air and another 80 and a touchdown on the ground, and you take away that 80 and cut it into 10 or 15, it's just not the same. So Lamar Jackson, man, I don't know where to go from here with him, to be honest with you, yet. It's going to take some more thought, to be honest, but I do think that we're getting to a point where we're at that point where I can no longer consider him a must-play type of guy. Tyler Sperry, appreciate the super chat. I will address it after what I got right and what I got wrong. So here's something I got right. And it might feel like a little ridiculous that I'm going through this one, because most people, I don't think, disagreed with me on this. However, there were like a couple stray comments that I saw over the past week of people that were saying, the Seahawks defense, they really screwed me this past week. Like, they were supposed to be this great play against the Tennessee Titans, and they really weren't. Like, they were actually kind of a bad play. They got like 4 points and 5 points in most formats that week. So, heading into the week, I think some people were probably in their corner just, being like, are the Seahawks defense good anymore? I mean, are we seeing them just kind of regress as a unit? And I kept telling people, like, one bad week in Tennessee and against a team that is just desperate to do anything and to get any win is like their Super Bowl. I don't view that as like the end all be all for the I don't view that as the end all be all for the Seattle Seahawks, man. I just don't. Like, I think that that's one of those I'm just really willing to overlook when it comes to what they've done on the duration of the season. I think it's just one of those things that you kind of have to overlook. So the Seahawks were the number one defense for me again this week, and they paid off in a massive way. And it wasn't shocking at all, because I said to people, listen, if the Seahawks were playing the Rams again, or if they were playing even the 49ers, I think I would have given them like a bump down, or a team like the Chiefs or something like that. I would have ranked them lower. But with the Vikings matchup, like, that was always going to work, because I don't care. Max Brosmer was terrible. And the funny thing is, I had a lot of people that either went to Minnesota or were associated with Minnesota in my personal life telling me, I think you might be a little surprised with Max Brosmer. I was not surprised. Actually, I was kind of surprised how bad he was. Like, that's how bad it was. I'm sorry to Vikings fans. It's been a rough year. But the point being is that the Vikings are just one of those offenses that you want to target from a defensive perspective. And then you add on top of that, if you look at the entirety of their season, the Seahawks have been an unbelievable defense for fantasy football. So they come out and they basically win you your week if you play them. Like, I don't know any team. Like, I had him in a lot of my teams this week, and I won every single matchup, and they were a huge part of that. So, I mean, the swing that a defense can give you is that they have the thing that a defense can give you is that it can provide you such a big swing, because not everyone in your league pays attention to defense or special teams being kicker. It can give you such an advantage. And the Seahawks defense was the perfect example of that. That's a high upside defense that realistically they're not going to find themselves out of my top 12 most weeks, and especially moving forward, looking at their schedule, can't imagine they're outside of my top 10 at any point moving forward. Now, here's something I got wrong, and this one, honestly, I will say, feels like a red alert for me personally, kind of similar to Lamar, maybe not on that level, though. Listen, I think that when there's a lot of money on the line, and I talk about this a lot, like, when it comes to the question about J.J. McCarthy and why would they not give him another year as a starter, it's like, well, this is a $100 billion business. They're not going to give him another year as their unquestioned starter this year. It just will not happen. So you can expect them to bring in competition. That's not what this is about. This is me saying that, like, when you make an investment into somebody to the tune of, tens of billions of dollars, you do want to get production. And if you don't get it, they will get replaced. However, if the guy who replaced them isn't performing either, the team will go back to that bigger investment because they'll be able to justify it better. So what I'm getting at is when the Carolina Panthers made the switch from Rico Dowdle from Chuba Hubbard to Rico Dowdle, I understood it, because Chuba, I had kind of said during that period of time, Chuba was not bad. He had not been a bad player for the Carolina Panthers, but the bottom line is that the games that he missed, Rico Dowdle provided them something that they had not gotten from Chuba yet, which was unbelievable play. And so it was easy for them to be able to justify, hey, listen, we're paying Chuba Hubbard like $40 million, but at the same time, man, like, this guy behind him is cheaper, but he's crushing it. We can't take this guy off the field if we actually want to win games. So it was pretty easy for them to be able to justify putting the $40 million man on the bench for a guy who was cheaper but was just doing better. And so I always knew it wasn't because Chuba had been bad. It was just because Rico had been better. However, there has been something that has been absolutely really screwing him over the last several weeks. And I think it's very traceable back to that Green Bay Packers game where he left because of a groin injury briefly, but returned and dominated that game. But he has not been the same player since that Green Bay injury. And if you want proof of that, let's go through the numbers right now on fsroundup.com. So since week 9, which was that Green Bay game, he had 28 fantasy points, 2 rushing touchdowns. He was incredible in that game. But since then, week 10, he had 15 fantasy points and 18 carries for 53 yards. Not a great game. Still okay for fantasy, not great. Week 11, he had 15 fantasy points, 19 for 45. Week 12, he had 6 carries for 38 yards. So this was the first week that I had something that it was the first week that I knew something was going wrong, because to not be able to not run against the 49ers defense, who has been pretty terrible against the run all year, because they've sustained an an astronomical amount of injuries over the collective of the season. And so it was pretty crazy for them to do that. And it did feel like a coaching move, so I decided this week, heading into last week, to write it off. I said, listen, I think that was a mistake on the coaching. I think they learned from it. Rico will get touches in this game. So the week 13 stats aren't up yet on the site. But here's the gist of this one. Rico Dowdle did get a lot of work. He did. But it didn't go well for him in fantasy. He had about 10 points in a full PPR format. And you know who it went really well for? Chuba Hubbard had a great day yesterday against the Los Angeles Rams. And guess what was a real big reason why they won that game? He was more effective on the ground than Rico Dowdle, and he was more effective in the air than Rico Dowdle was. So not only was I wrong about telling a lot of people, because I had a lot of questions about Rico Dowdle heading into yesterday. I had a lot of questions about him, and every time it felt like I was telling someone, play Rico Dowdle. Not only was I wrong for yesterday, but I'm legitimately worried about his future moving forward with this team. Because if you look at the snap counts and if you look at the usage yesterday, Chuba did get less work than Rico, but it was by like 1 touch. I think Rico had 20 total opportunities and Chuba had about 18 or 19. So it was a very, very even split yesterday. And that makes me wonder, what's the future of Rico Dowdle? Does he go back to more of a backup role? Or does Chuba Hubbard continue to stay the backup while Rico continues to get touch after touch after touch without any effectiveness? All I know is this. Rico Dowdle has not been the same player since Green Bay. And number 2, Chuba Hubbard had a really good game yesterday. My guard is up on this one. And that's why I said I think it's borderline red alert for me on here. Because with Lamar, I know now that, like, against the Bengals, if you can't make it work, it's just not going to work. But with Rico, that was one of those moments yesterday where I said, it's really easy for a team to justify going back to their $40 million running back when their cheaper running back, who initially was better, but is no longer better, it's going to be easier for them to go back to that $40 million investment. So I'm a little worried about Rico Dowdle. And it wasn't just this past week that I got wrong. I'm worried about Rico Dowdle. So I hope you have Chuba Hubbard. If he is out there in your leagues, I don't think his roster percentage is under 50%, but I would say if he's out there, you need to make sure you get him, especially if you have Rico Dowdle right now. Here's something I got right. And the last two will kind of end on some grander research topics, because as many of you know who follow me during the off season, I get really deep into research, like basically most of the time around the summertime. Like as we get closer to the fantasy season in the months of like May, June, July, I go through a lot of like in-depth heavy research that historically has done really well on finding good breakouts and finding guys to fade in fantasy football. So there was a new one that I started this year, and because I wanted to see what the effectiveness was of running backs who had 350 plus touch seasons, because those seasons are legendary, right? Like Saquon Barkley's massive year last year kind of ignited this thought process for me, which was I want to know what it was like for that running back after that season, because in all likelihood, a running back who gets 350 plus touches and is that dominant in fantasy, is probably going to be a top 3 pick in fantasy the following year. So I wanted to see if Saquon was going to be a landmine pick. And so I started researching running backs with 350 plus touches and what happened to them the next year. And a lot of times when I do research, it's not going to be 100% hit rate, right? Like a lot of times it's going to be 80%, it'll be 85%, it'll be 83%. Rarely is research that I do 100% hit rate. This one was. So what I found out was that every running back who's had 350 plus touch season, they always lose volume. 100% of them lose out on volume the following season, and about 90+% of those running backs the following year in fantasy are not top 10 running backs. So their next season is usually extremely disappointing. And whether that is because of lack of touches or because of lack of efficiency, it doesn't matter. But my theory going into that was, how is it possible for A, their bodies to hold up for another massive workload, and B, their bodies to be able to be as efficient as they were the previous year when they had the massive year? So that was my big thought process going into it. And I was really justified coming out of that because there was 3 running backs this past year who had 350 plus touch seasons in 2024. It was Bijan Robinson, it was Kyren Williams, and it was Saquon Barkley. 2 of those running backs are either A, getting less work, Kyren Williams, or B, not as efficient as last year by a long shot, Saquon Barkley. And this is something that I caught a lot of flack for during the offseason. Saquon Barkley, a lot of Eagles fans came at me and said, listen, man, you're stupid. Like, Saquon Barkley is that dude. And I said, this is not a question of if Saquon is that dude or not. I know Saquon's that dude. But history doesn't lie. No running back has had multiple 350-plus touch seasons and gained volume the next year, and very few of them maintain that volume even to the slightest degree. And we're good in fantasy the next year. There was a couple outliers on there. Like, you can go back and find that video somewhere in the archives of the offseason. Because I think Zeke was one of the few that had broken that trend, and there was a couple others as well. But bottom line being is that most of them are not top 10 running backs the following year after their massive season. So I feel pretty vindicated on this one. And it's not that I am rooting for Saquon's demise, not that I'm rooting for Kyren's demise. I'm not rooting for Bijan's demise either. But what I'm trying to tell you is that history repeats itself. And this is why I'm a big research and history type of guy, because this stuff matters as we get deeper into the year. And Saquon Barkley, to me, is not going to be a guy that's going to recover his value that he had heading into the season and what he had last season. It's just not going to work anymore. He's kind of very close to that edge of, do I consider benching him like I consider benching Justin Jefferson? He's not on that level yet, but there's going to be guys, he's going to continue to find himself in RB2 range for me personally. So we'll end on this right here. This is something, this is probably going to be my most honest moment on this segment right here of all time. This is something I take a lot of pride in. Defense is obviously something I take a lot of pride in on this channel. But the other thing was that a lot of people knew me, and I kind of broke onto the scene for a lot of people last year as the guy who was shouting Chuba Hubbard, Chuba Hubbard, Chuba Hubbard at the top of roofs, right? In every rooftop, and anyone who would listen, I was yelling in your ear, draft Chuba Hubbard, draft Chuba Hubbard. And it worked out to an enormous degree. And I went through this video in the offseason twice this past offseason. That wasn't an accident. I had, I felt like I had a lot of foreknowledge about how this one was going to go with Chuba last year. So I was telling people with full confidence, you need to draft him. And I felt so extremely vindicated watching his season last year. And so the research that I did that found me to Chuba Hubbard was it's very, very in-depth, and it's also it's hard to explain on this live stream right now. Basically what it is trying to find unsuspecting league-winning running backs. Guys that are being drafted well outside of the top, 3, 4, 5 rounds of fantasy drafts. Guys that you would not suspect have league-winning potential. There's a formula that I've been able to find because Kyron Williams back in 2023 was an undrafted guy for most teams, and I wanted to replicate that. However, what it really started with was Josh Jacobs in 2022 when he was with the Oakland, or at the time, the Las Vegas Raiders, and he was awesome that year. And so that was what kickstarted this whole thing. So I found something with Kyron in that year that I felt like was significant evidence that I could kind of track these guys into every season. And I found that with Chuba in 2024. So I put together a big list. Not a big list. There's actually very few running backs who make this list because they have to hit on basically every single one of these metrics. But if you go back and watch that video, what you'll find is that the 6 running backs who were on that list, and on the top of my head, I'm going to try to rattle these off. Go vet me if you remember this video. Jaylen Warren, Tyjae Spears, Trey Benson, Jerome Ford, Audric Estime, and Tyrone Tracy Jr. So this is why it's such a bummer for me. This year, that has not worked. The closest that anyone is to being that guy, that unsuspecting league winner, is Jaylen Warren. Jaylen Warren is the running back 19 in full PPR right now. It's not like Chuba was last year. Chuba was a borderline undrafted guy in most drafts last year and was the running back 15 when it was all said and done. But he was the running back 12, I believe, in fantasy points per game. He was pretty awesome. Jaylen Warren is not on that same level. So I feel like, Chuba Hubbard was such a critical piece to a lot of my team's successes last year. And I was bragging about it for so long last year, bragged about it into the offseason, and I will probably continue to brag about it because I do still believe in the research. This was an off year, though, because a lot of it has to do with rookie running backs. And rookie running backs who have a lot of hype on their team, a lot of people just assume that they become the guy. Well, if you remember in the Chuba year last year, Jonathan Brooks was drafted out of the University of Texas, and most people just assumed that he was going to be the lead back. That obviously did not happen, and Chuba was awesome. So this year, it was the year of the rookie running back, right? Cam Scatterbo came in. It was better than Tyrone Tracy and Devin Singletary. Guys like Jaylen Warren. Caleb Johnson has done nothing, though. But there's a lot of other guys like Jerome Ford on the list. Audric Estime at the time was in Denver. Bottom line is this. The research is clearly not 100% research, but I still believe in it. However, it has not worked this year because the best running back who has fit that billing this year is Jaylen Warren, and he's not a guy I would call a league winner. I think he's a solid contributor to your team, but I would not call Jaylen Warren a league-winning player. He doesn't have the 30-point ceiling games like Chuba did last year, or like Kyron did when he did it, or like Josh Jacobs did when he did it. He doesn't have those weeks. Jaylen Warren's best weeks are 19 to 18 points, which is good. It's going to win you weeks. It's going to help your team, but he's not a league winner. And that's a really, really big bummer for me because that research I was super confident in, and I still am. But I can't lie to you and say that it didn't affect my psyche a little bit, to be honest. That's the most honest I think I've gotten on this segment here because that research means a lot to me. That was what I got right and wrong. Like the video, subscribe to the channel to show your support, and I'll go ahead and address the super chats and then get out of here. Tyler Sperry, man, good to see you. Appreciate your patience. Do you think Jaden Daniels will play? This is a interesting discussion because from the grander scheme of like bigger business, right? And again, it's something I talk about a lot on this segment here. this is a big business. I mean, it's one of the biggest businesses in all of the world. Hundreds of billions of dollars on the line. And so most of the time, like if you're thinking from that mindset, you want to protect your most valuable asset, which is the quarterback. He may not be the highest paid player in the league, and he's not, but he is their most valuable asset. However, Joe Burrow, I think this is why one of the reasons I love Joe Burrow so much as a Steelers fan. Like I love Joe Burrow, and I find myself root for the Bengals a lot because of him, even though I'm a Steelers fan. I think my grandfather would turn over in his grave if he heard me say that. But I root for Joe Burrow, and one of the reasons why is because if you watched the Thursday night game, the Thanksgiving finale, the Bengals and the Ravens, before the game he gave kind of a brief, one of those brief on-field interviews, and the lady was asking him, why are you coming back, right? Like, this team doesn't have much, like, hope for the playoffs. You guys are basically eliminated. Why are you coming back? And his answer, I thought, was incredible. He basically said, like, you know, we get paid millions upon millions of dollars to play a little kid's game, and I just want to go out there and have fun with my guys. You don't rehab to get back from injury just to not play and sit on the sidelines and collect a paycheck. And I thought to myself, when you put it that way, it makes so much sense why these guys come back and play. And it's a reason I love Joe Burrow, and I feel the same about Jaden. And I think that Jaden Daniels is a dog, and I think that he will want to play regardless of whether or not the team agrees with the decision. And maybe it's one of those scenarios where Washington and someone above him has more power and says, you're not playing. We're shutting you down. We're going to put you on the IR, and you're not going to come back. Or maybe it's like in Cincinnati where Joe Burrow has tons of power and influence in that organization. It says, yeah, I don't really care what you say. I'm coming back anyways. Like, you know, go have a beer and watch me dominate. So Jaden Daniels, I'm kind of on the side if he does play because he's a player who wants to play. Like, if you were asking me, does Trevor Lawrence come back and play? I would probably say no, because I don't think Trevor loves the game. He said it himself. But when you've got a guy like Jaden, who I think loves the game, appreciates and respects the game as much as he does, and wants to just play and have fun, I think that's where I'm going to say I think Jaden Daniels probably will play. Appreciate the super chat. And then Adrian, we'll end on you. Appreciate the super chat and your patience. Feel a sneeze coming on. You know that feeling? I knew it was coming. Hey, Ryan, Rico Dowdle, do you think after the bye week he will be fully recovered? Mike Evans is coming back. Will that affect Emeka Egbuka? Thoughts on Joe Burrow? Well, my thoughts on Joe Burrow from a player perspective I just went through, but from a fantasy perspective, I definitely think he's a quarterback that's going to be a pretty frequent quarterback one in my rankings. He plays the Bills this week. I'm pretty confident in that matchup. I think Burrow will have one of his better games of the year, possibly his best game of the year this week. So I'm pretty bullish on Joe Burrow moving forward. His first game back to action I thought was really pretty awesome, all things considered. A little bit of rust, of course. That's natural. But I do think that Joe Burrow overall, from a fantasy perspective, really kind of bucked his trend of not being very good in the first week back. So I'm pretty bullish on Joe Burrow from a fantasy perspective moving forward. Rico Dowdle. I just had a diatribe about Rico. I'm not sure if you were here for it. I've got a lot of concern with Rico. Like, he's almost a red alert situation for me. And it's not just because of the health anymore. Like, the health, yes, I do think is a problem. To answer your question, I don't think I can see this one getting fully recovered after the bye week because it's something that he's been playing through for weeks at this point. And I think it was a pretty serious, not serious, like obviously he didn't need surgery or anything, but I think it was a pretty hefty groin pull. I mean, all I have to go off of is watching the guy play. I don't have inside access to that building, but I do know this. My eyes aren't lying to me when I see Rico just getting stuffed behind the backfield. When originally the guy would power through and he would collect burst and go around someone. Like, Rico has not been the same player. I have a hard time believing that after the bye week, he comes back and is the same player. However, the bigger concern I have with it, to reiterate it, is that Chuba Hubbard is going to come in and take his job back. I have a real concern with that. I really do. When you look at the split yesterday for the Panthers and you see how much Chuba had involvement in this offense, and not only the involvement, but the efficiency of both backs, it was so clear who the better back was yesterday. That was Chuba Hubbard. So it's easy for a team to justify, say, hey, this guy's a $40 million back. The reason we put him on the bench is because the backup was doing better. Well, the backup hasn't been doing good the last month. So it's going to be really easy for the Panthers, if they want to take a hard look at this, to justify to themselves, we're just going to put Rico on the bench again and let him get healthy, and we're going to put Chuba out there because he's been doing good again. So I do have a lot of concerns when it comes to Rico Dowdle moving forward. I will say that. Like, I'll reiterate it again and end that topic on this. If Chuba Hubbard is out there on waivers, and I don't think he's on many, but if he's out there, pick him up. Especially if you have Rico. You have no excuse to not pick up Rico. Mike Evans, are we confirmed that he's coming back? I obviously know they can open his practice window here this week, but I don't know for a fact that he's coming back. They're saying, Todd Bowles says that there's a possibility Mike returns this week. I don't even feel like that's the greatest effect on Egbuka. I think Egbuka is becoming a concern for me from a different perspective. It's kind of similar to Rico. If you look at Egbuka, when he got that injury, I don't remember what week it was. Maybe I can glean it from just looking at our site right now. Let me go back. I thought it was around like week 8 or something like that. Week 7? There was a week where he missed a good amount of time. It must have been this game against the 49ers. So he came in that game in week 6. He missed a bunch of snaps. So I feel like this was the game. Yeah, I think this was the game that Egbuka went down. And then after that, let's check his game log. So week 7, he had 9.8 fantasy points on 11 targets. Yeah, this was when it happened. Then he had 6.5 on 8 targets. Week 9 was their bye week. Week 10 comes back and has a big game. Good for him. But that's his only big game since then. Emeka Egbuka has been a problem since the injury. And for me, it was always like coming down to the fact that I believed that he was a really good player, and he was kind of like one of those guys that I was like, it's not even worth arguing over. He's a wide receiver 1. Now with Godwin back and looking healthier, and with the return of Bucky, and with the return potentially of Mike, I'm worried about Emeka Egbuka. I don't think he's looked the same. He's dropped balls. There's involvement from other receivers. Baker is obviously not healthy. I mean, Emeka Egbuka, to me, is going to drop my rankings this week for sure. And I'm getting worried about him, with or without Mike Evans. Like, I definitely think Egbuka is going to be impacted by this. I think he'll still be a consistent target in the offense, but we may see that target number drop from like a relatively consistent 7 to 10 targets to 6 to 5. Like, I think that's a real danger here. So, yeah, I've got concerns. Appreciate the super chat. And we'll end on that. So make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel to show your support. And if you want to get a full team breakdown from me, you can do that. There's a link in the description. There's a link in the description to go to the site for that team breakdown. Or if you just want to join the premium subscription, you're more than welcome to do that as well and get access to features that will win you your league this year. Love you guys, and I'll see you on tomorrow's videos. Peace out.